wow, I didn't particularly enjoy the episode. So yeah, let's look at it. Also, I hope I actually am live. This is the first time I've ever gone live on this channel. On the other channel, it's already like pre-connected, so I'm not worrying about it. But this episode to me was pretty poor. I mean, it just seems like, so I want to kind of explain what happens in the book before I really talk about why I disliked this episode. So in the book, picking up off of what happens on the last episode. So the last episode finishes with Ares giving them a ride, and it's basically just this truck with animals, and they hitch a ride, and they're going to go to Las Vegas, and then later on Santa Monica. And so all of this happens, and that's kind of the setup. And so going into the book, what ends up happening is we see a situation in which they basically, because they're hungry, they're tired, they're in a really bad condition, given that they've been traveling in the back of basically an animal truck for a while. And again, also, you do see, like, they do this whole elaborate thing where they free the animals, very similar to what happens in the show. In the show, they really cut it out. They didn't really show you, like, them actually doing it, which, again, was all fine. But the problem I have is, like, the whole, like, Lotus Casino, hotel, whatever, is so much different, I feel like, in the setup compared to the show. Where it's like the show, they're actively trying to go there to find Hermes, which kind of feels odd. Like, why would Hermes be, like, actively hanging out in basically a monster trap, more or less? And so you have this plot contrivance, right? Because the whole plot contrivance is, how do our trio find the underworld? They don't know where the underworld is. And so the show, because they didn't want to do a certain plotline, because the way they find the underworld in the book is very different, because there's this whole plot, I forget the monster's name, but it's basically he stretches you or compresses you to death on a bed. It's a very forgettable kind of part. So I understand why they would have cut it out, but the problem is, the big thing is, he is someone that knows where the underworld is, because there's like a little pamphlet or whatever on his, like, I guess, wall. There's order list. It's kind of similar to the way Medusa works. And so that's how they figure out where the underworld is. And so, because the show didn't do that, and I don't know if it's budget or because the episodes are really short. This episode, I think, was probably the shortest of the entire season so far. It was only, what, 29 minutes? Maybe they just cut it because they didn't have time. I just sit here and I go, okay, so now they've got to figure out how they're going to get to the underworld. How are they going to get to Santa Monica? Like, how are they going to do all these things? And so it's much different in the book, but it makes more sense, right? And the whole hotel, or the casino, the Lotus Casino, is done as, it's like, it draws you in, right? It draws on your desperation, your want and need of luxury and comfort. And so that's what kind of draws them in, right? It's more like a trap, right? It feels more like kind of how Medusa's lair is in the book as well, where it feels like it's to lure you in. These kids are really desperate, and so they get lured in. And so that, it feels significantly different, because as we see in the TV show, they already know it's a trap, right? They know that, oh yeah, this place is going to make you, like, forget everything that's going on and whatever. And to me, they just didn't really get the appeal of that, because these kids shouldn't really know that. I mean, I guess Grover might, but Grover just comes off as exposition dump once again. And so my biggest, like, issue with this is just the entire setup, that it's like, okay, they're going to this casino because they need Hermes. Because they need Hermes to get somewhere, and then also to, like, tell them where the underworld is. And so it comes off as very much of a contrivance, right? Like, it's very lucky that Percy and Annabeth also don't start forgetting everything. That it only happens to Grover, the character that's completely useless to the trio. And so they continuously are basically cutting everything that makes Grover an interesting character to me. They're cutting his entire storyline, right? It's almost been Percy and Annabeth are our heroes, and Grover is this side character that just holds back our main characters. And so I really disliked the way that we ended up seeing this kind of play out in the show, because it feels repetitive, right? We're getting the same point where Grover does nothing. He's a useless character. And it's like, yes, we had nice moments for him where it's like he doesn't feel comfortable or being able to be open with his friends and all that, but it just doesn't go anywhere. They don't do anything with it, right? And then the cheesy line of, oh, how Annabeth and Percy weren't affected at all by the Lotus Casino, was because, oh, they were together and it's harder to forget things. It's like, oh, that's what you did? So, I don't know. Yes, thank you. That is the name, Alchemist. Yes, thank you. But I'd love to hear your opinions, by the way, Alchemist, on this, on what you thought of the episode. But to me personally, it just seems like they took so many things from the book and then just didn't do them in the show at all. And it just doesn't make any sense how we get to point A to point B. It's like Hermes doesn't want to help them at all. He's also hanging out in a place where he knows monsters get lured to. Or where he basically they're learning kids to, more or less. And then he also doesn't basically tell them that they've gone past summer solstice, which doesn't happen in the book either. That doesn't really make any sense to me, personally. And so you have this whole idea, but then the thing is, Hermes allows Annabeth to steal his keys while then allowing them to take his car and all this. And I'm just like, what? Did you just have a change of hearts randomly in here? The other part of this is, which was a big complaint I had of the movie version of events, was Percy Jackson in the book. This is one of those big moments where he triumphs. He's the one that basically figures out, oh yeah, this is a trap. We got to get everybody out of here. In the movie, they did it where Poseidon helps him. In the show, they do it where it's like Hermes helps them. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, why? Have Percy understand what this is and give him a moment of just being a hero or being smart, being clever. And they don't do that. And so they go to grab Grover, who's playing this game. And it's like, Grover is the only character out of the three that's like, okay, this is kind of book accurate to kind of what happens in the book, where it's like, yeah, they get lured in because there's all these pleasantries and there's all these things that keep them basically ensnared and trapped. And so the show just didn't do that really at all with Percy or Annabeth. And it doesn't really even make sense, right? Like, it does not make sense how Percy and Annabeth were in this casino for days, right? That doesn't make any sense, because in the show, they never were ensnared by any of these things. What we saw on screen is they were wandering for about a couple minutes, and then bam, they found Hermes. It doesn't make any sense, because they weren't lured into any of these other activities, unless we're just saying that time moves quicker in the Lotus Casino, or it stops, or whatever. But that doesn't make any sense, because they're not, like, it doesn't make any sense to me. And so I really disliked that entire plot. I thought the stuff with Hermes was weird, because it started introducing payoffs with, or stuff about Luke and his mother's backstory in book 1, when that's a book 5 thing. Like, it's very vital to understanding the character of Luke, and it's very vital to that arc for Percy in book 5. Made no sense why it's here, outside of giving some relevance as to why Hermes would help them and why he's even in this episode. So that was weird. There was a lot of things character-wise that I just felt like were not good in this episode. We also have this opening shot, which is one of the dreams that Percy has in the book. It's very similar, except in the book, it's a lot more extended. We get to see Hades' throne, and the way it's done, it's much different. It's more ominous. It's like just better done. And this, we get like, oh, this is like the principal talking to a student, and it just feels very off. It doesn't feel right for what the scene is supposed to be. Me, as a book reader, I know what the scene is. I'm not gonna spoil it, but it seemed really weird. It just didn't seem right. But yeah, I think Alchemist has a great point, right? I just think there were so many things that was just wrong in this episode, right? Like, the fact that I'm actually contemplating whether I liked the movie's version of the Lotus Casino or the show's version is actually insane. Because at least, like, in the movie, it got the tone down correctly. This is a place that these kids, or, well, in the movie, it wasn't really kids, they're more like teenagers, but it's like them getting ensnared with all these pleasantries, these games or whatnot, and it feels more like the atmosphere is right there. Now, again, both of them struggle to actually be book accurate or anything close to really what happens there, but at least in the movie, it's like, okay, it's somewhat what is going on, right? Percy talking to people, figuring out, oh, wait a second, these people have been here for years, right? Except in the movie, they ruin it by having Poseidon be the thing that pushes Percy over the edge, but at least that, like, stuff is there. The show, they don't do any of that. None of it. Like, it just blows my mind. So then you have like the back 12 minutes is just Percy learning how to drive a car, which is funny. It's funny. It's Marvel comedy, but when you have so much in this episode that needed to be done for the rest of the season, why did we waste like 4 minutes of screen time with Percy trying to learn how to drive? It's wasted time. I don't know. I'm trying to stay composed because I just watched the episode, so a lot of this is going to be biased. I'm going to think about this, and I wanted to talk about it on stream because I'm going to be doing my like actual big like recording of the episode tomorrow with my friend. So I wanted to like talk through some of these things, but like the more I talk about it, I just don't understand why they did certain things, right? Is it the budget? Is that why they cut out certain things? Is it because of we have to get here and there and we can't do certain things, right? Like how Alchemist said, like, can we not have the Procrustes? I'm not saying that right, I guarantee it, but I just don't understand. I don't understand why they did everything. The movie version is better. I think so. Like, I think the movie version, like, it just captured what it was so much better. I'm curious if they didn't want to show the kids being ensnared by a casino. They recently sanitized the drinking of beer, smoking, and gambling in the Pinocchio remake. Yeah, so I think this is weird because why didn't they just make it like an amusement park? Right? Like, I think they should have made it into, oh, it's, you know, it has, like in the book, it has this water slide that's like really talked about. It's really something painted in the book. Why not do that, right? Like, make it something that as a kid you would really like. So, for instance, a kid nowadays would love to see like Fortnite and all these other things. Like, make it something that would ensnare them. For Annabeth, she's someone that really likes architecture. That's something in the book that they play on. So have an architecture game, all these things. There's a really cool thing in the book where it's like Grover gets to play as like the deer shooting the humans or whatever, getting revenge. Oh, that's really good because it shows that like this trap is built for each individual person for what they would like. It makes it really awesome. And the reason I hate this episode so much is because this was the episode I was really looking forward to. I think the Lotus Casino is one of the most interesting parts of Percy Jackson, one of the things that Rick Riordan created. And so watching it like just almost feel like a plot, not almost, is a plot device is unfortunate. I feel like we should have gotten a D'Angelo. Yeah, that would have been great, right? I'm not going to spoil too much because I don't want to spoil for, you know, if anybody rewatches this and they only watched the show. But yeah, I mean, there's some vital characters that could have made a cameo here that would have been really cool just for us book readers knowing what they're going to be later on. That would have been really cool. I just think this was a missed opportunity, right? It was a missed opportunity to cement this episode as we're getting towards the climax of the story, because now I have a very bad taste in my mouth. And that's not even getting towards the end of the episode, right? So we have all this stuff and Percy goes down because he believes he's going to see his father. Now, I don't remember in the show if that was a big thing, like in episode, I think 4, or is it episode 3? It's episode 4, I believe. So episode 4, when the water spirit talks to him or whatever, I don't ever think it was mentioned that Poseidon was actually going to be there. It was more that he was going to get gifts, right? Or help, right? That he was going to get help. And so he goes down expecting it to be his father, and it's not, which is something that's like, it's interesting to tie into like how Percy's been on this arc where he's like been more like liking his father more or less. And then this is kind of to like counter that. But my biggest problem is like, okay, so now we have here that the summer solstice has already passed. The war should have already begun then, right? So the war should have already begun. And so you have this whole thing where basically they're telling Percy that he should just go back. He failed his quest and that he should go to back to Camp Half-Blood. It's like, what? What? What are we talking about? Like, that's not, like, Poseidon was using Percy, right, in the book. It was that. But then Poseidon would understand that, yes, Percy needs to find this bolt. It's very important. Like, it's just terrible. It's terrible adaptation, terrible writing, in my opinion. And then we also have the idea that, like, they changed up the whole thing where in the book, Percy gets 3 pearls, similar to the way the movie did it. And then he gets 4 in the show, and I'm like, okay, I guess we're just gonna skip that whole plot line. I can't judge it yet because we don't know where it's going, but yeah. we then have this big cliffhanger, right? The big cliffhanger of episode 5 was like, oh, Grover figured out who stole the lightning bolt or whatever. I wonder who it could be. And I was sitting there, I'm like, yeah, it's Clarice. We get it. But the conclusion here is very interesting. It's like, because Ares didn't want to say who stole it because he figured out who captured it or whatever, it's instantly Clarice. Clarice is who's not somebody that is a thief. What is her motive? Like, it's just like, I don't know. Like, it doesn't make any sense given the knowledge I feel like Grover and Annabeth would have. Annabeth specifically, she doesn't even question this. That's something that's completely different in the book. Is like, Annabeth is very wary of what's going on, right? Like, in the book at this point, she still thinks, yeah, it was Hades. Hades had to have sent somebody to steal it for her. But then she's also questioning, maybe that's not right, because why would Hades then be sending out people to try and find Percy? Right, so there's a lot of that going on that makes Annabeth seem much smarter in the book. And there's just none of that here. Like, it's very bland. It doesn't really make sense when you really think about it for more than, like, 2 seconds. I don't know. It's a weird thing. It's just, I don't know. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions on this, because I feel like, I don't know if I'm going too far in, but what? I don't know what. Yeah, exactly, Alchemist. This is the thing, right? That's a great point. That is a fantastic point that you bring up. It's like, how does that make sense? Like, what is the time limit on how long do they have to be in this thing? And for them to start forgetting things, right? Like, how long does it have to happen? Because you have to think about, there's characters that we know that are in the Lotus casino right now, and apparently they're getting affected by this, and it's very important to the storyline. So if Percy and Annabeth can be together, and they're fine, why couldn't so again, there's a lot of logical inconsistencies given what we know is going to happen in the story, and so now Rick Riordan is going to have to change that to some capacity to make that make sense. It feels like season 1 of Game of Thrones, not too big of a budget, so a lot has to be cut from and added to the show before the bigger budget season. So I disagree. I get what you're saying, right? Whereas in parts of it, I agree. But I think other parts I disagree. As someone who's been rereading a Game of Thrones very heavily, the show and the book hit the same themes. They hit all the same plot lines. Everything is fairly consistent. There isn't a lot of changing of things. The only things that we see are like changes are like, for instance, we don't see battles because they didn't have the budget, right? So that's more towards the end of the first season. But in book 1 versus Percy Jackson season 1, they've completely cut multiple plot lines. They've completely cut like scenes that are vital to storylines, Grover specifically. And so I look at it and I go, yes, I understand what you're saying. But at the same time, I disagree, because season 1 to me was a perfect adaptation. It was a perfect adaptation of book 1. I may be streaming Noro. I wouldn't count on it. I just wanted to like vent some thoughts out here and just see what people maybe thought about. And I also just thought it was a good time for a live stream, because I didn't want to make like a first reaction to the episode, because I'm going to be already recording that. And then I also do another video on the good and bad of the episode. And this is just a weird one. Right? It's a weird episode to me, because I don't think there was a lot of positive that I got out of this episode. Like, there wasn't anything where I was like, man, that was done really well. I think the actor who played Hermes, and even though I don't think we should have gotten that Hermes backstory with Luke's mother this early, I think the actor who's playing Hermes does a very good job. I think some of the material that he was given and kind of putting some spin on that, right? Like, I think that was good, right? That would be a good element to me, but like, the acting in this episode wasn't really good by any of the actors really outside of Hermes, in my opinion. I don't know. Yeah, I think this is probably my least favorite episode of all 6 so far, which is weird. It's really weird for me to think about that, because given about how much I hated Annabeth's character throughout the first like 3 or 4 episodes, it's really weird to think about, because I think for me, this was the most excited I was going into an episode, and I was very sorely disappointed. I want to go through my notes. I want to see if there's anything else because I was having some computer issues that I want to talk about, but those are the main ones, right? I think the Ares reveal of like who stole the bolts was not handled very well at all, right? It feels very stupid to me that we changed a plot line just so that Percy and Annabeth could be alone in the last episode. And that's what I mean when I was talking about that episode and why I thought it was going to be bad going into this episode, because it just didn't make much sense to me. And so Grover goes into it. And the other part about Grover is like, he almost just seems like an afterthought. He's just pushed to the side. Again, another episode in which it's Percy and Annabeth, and then Grover is nowhere to be found. He just gets pushed to the side. So, yeah, just wasn't... I wasn't thrilled with the way that was handled. I wasn't really thrilled with the way Percy's dream sequence went in this. It just wasn't very good, in my opinion. Like, it hit the same beats, but it didn't have the feel because of the atmosphere and the setting that they decided to go with. The Lotus Casino wasn't really what it should have been. It didn't have the effects that I think it should have had, which I think is interesting, given that I feel like they were taking shots at the movie for doing the whole eating the lotus, like flower cookie or whatever they did in the movie, but then yet they did it and it was equally not as good. So I thought that was interesting. The ending stuff with how they changed when Percy actually does go to Santa Monica was very poorly handled, in my opinion. I don't know. When your episodes only have 20 minutes of content, tension and mystery has to be cut for pushing the story forward. I agree, right? I do agree, Wibbles, like, it is difficult to do that, but I think there's other stuff where I think they could just do it better, right? Like, but this is the thing. They've shown that they can do 35 minutes for an episode, right? Instead of doing, you know, these very short episodes. And they just choose not to. Like, they're just choosing just not to do so. And the other thing, like, the thing I'm talking about is, like, you don't need Hermes in this episode. You do not need Hermes in this episode, right? Like, play the Lotus stuff out the way it is in the book, and you don't have to have extra, like, CGI. You don't have to have extra set design. It's the same thing. Just do it correctly. The stuff at the end, right? The stuff when it comes to, like, the water spirit talking to Percy. They just changed stuff that was just dialogue for no reason. There was no reason to change it. That's my issue, right? Is like, there's stuff that they're doing that I'm like, I'm trying to decipher why they do certain things, but it doesn't make sense. Ja, I could try. I've never heard of that before, though. I'm baffled with how short the episodes are. Also, I'm confused why the episodes are edited for commercial breaks. Does Disney hope to air these on? So the way I look at this, Alchemist, is I am someone that does not pay for Disney Plus like the big one. I have the basic version. So for me, it does play out like it's on cable. Like, so when those breaks that you kind of see in the episode, I do basically get that. I get an ad in between that little section that you think is weird. So yes, they basically are doing it that way. I agree. I will say, I mean, it doesn't really matter that much. Like, that part happens before Ares, and it doesn't really particularly matter when you show it, in my opinion. But yeah, I do think it's good that they did keep that part of it. But I don't know. You guys have anything else you want to talk about before I end the stream? Just looking over my notes to see if there's anything I want to really talk about in this stream before I end it out. I did like that we at least introduced the idea of Grover wanting a searcher's license to look for Pan. That was good. That was something I thought was well done, except they really just dropped that plot. Like, they brought it up and then just completely forgot about it. And it's maybe never going to even be talked about, so we'll see where that goes. I don't know. that's about all I got to say. I went through my notes quickly. I didn't see anything else, but let me see what you guys got to say. Wait, I had no idea. Yeah, so there's actually 2 versions. They changed this, and I think this is because Disney's not doing well, but they have a $7 version of Disney Plus, which runs ads. You get ads probably about, I think Percy Jackson, it was about like 7-8 minutes, and then you would get like an ad that was probably like a minute and a half long. And then there's like, I think it's like 12 or 13, and I think that's a no ad situation. It could be different though if you basically change it. Like it could be different if you had Hulu or something, but you think we are going to get the water, but no. Because the whole purpose of that section of the story, and I think it's very important, is because that's the reason that's there is for them to figure out how to get to the underworld, because they didn't know how to get to the underworld. That is why that's important. So they don't need to do that now. And also it's extra like CGI that they're going to have to do and all that. That's why Hermes was in this episode. It was a plot contrivance. That's why the hotel or the casino was in this episode, so that they could figure out where the underworld is, because in a very like really weird scene, like they have instructions of where the underworld is, and the car is going to take them there. That is what's going to happen. So yeah, I don't know. The show isn't particularly great or particularly bad. It's just very bland, so there isn't a whole bunch to say. I don't see the show living for... I mean, I hope that's not the case, Alchemist, but I can't disagree. I mean, I think every episode I've had has either been a 7 or like an 8, and I think only one of them has been an 8. Episode 4 I thought was the best episode. I thought it was an 8. The rest of them I thought have been like around a 7, 7.5. So I think the show's been... It's been good enough. And then this episode, right? Like me, I'm going to give this episode like a 5. I think this episode was very poor. Compared to the other episodes, this episode was the worst by far. In my opinion. It was by far was the shortest, I think, of the season. It had the least to do when it came to character work for our characters. It was the least impactful. Like, there wasn't an impactful, like, moment in this. You might be thinking, oh, the end. The end was not good, especially from a book fan's point of view. So, again, wasn't great. But yeah. It's short because they plan on putting it on ABC or some shit. They did the same with the Miss Marvel show. This explains all the cut to black transitions that are meant for commercial breaks. That's very unfortunate if it is. And I'm having a tough time understanding why Rick Riordan, who is an active writer in this show, is making these changes. It makes me like, I'm not going to say this because I don't know yet, and we don't know how this season's going to wrap up. Maybe this was just a wrinkle, right? Maybe the season is still going to be good. But it does feel like kind of selling his soul to Disney. I don't know. I mean, just the amount of sheer book changes to the entire story that have happened in only 6 episodes is wild. I mean, it's just wild. And again, I still think the show is better than the movie. I think this particular section of the story is worse than the particular section of the movie. That's how I look at it. I think the first 5 episodes of the show were all better than like the first half, a little over half of the movie. But then this section, I think they've completely screwed up. So, I don't know. But yeah, that is probably going to be the end of the stream. I just wanted to rant a little bit, see what the community kind of thought, what you guys were kind of thinking. And let me know if you guys are watching this after the stream. Let me know what your guys' thoughts were on the episode, because I personally, as you guys can probably tell, not a big fan, and I'll be interested to talk about it tomorrow as well, and then get that video out for you guys Friday. So I hope you guys enjoy all of that, and I will see you guys in the next one.